Well, officially start now.
Yeah.
Welcome, everybody. First podcast of 2020. It is here.
That's right. That is right.
We did, I forget when we started exactly. I want to say it was sometime in August, but we did 13 from August until December, which is pretty good.
Yeah, I thought so.
For starting it, I think we did a really good job.
I thought so.
Ending the year on lucky number 13.
I think it would be good for us to sort of try to revisit some of the topics that we brought up as well. I know we hit IoT over the head.
Yeah,
but I'd be interested to see if any of the trends we had discussed with Matt hit in the next 6 months.
Yeah. Well, actually enough, kind of conveniently enough, you brought that up. One of the guys I follow on YouTube called Jerry Rig Everything. Familiar with him?
You brought him up before. He
went to LG's SEC. It's an event they have. I don't know what it's called. SEC stands for. But regardless, he toured their LG Homes products, and it was like smart doors.
Oh, is that what you posted today?
I
saw that.
Today. Yeah. And like two of the things that we brought up in that podcast were things he visited. And I was like, damn, that's pretty impressive.
Right. That's pretty cool, man.
I was going to say, out of I think the 4 or 5 things he visited, 2 of them we talked about.
I guess we're not as stupid as we look.
At least we have that going for us. But today's podcast actually will be bringing up IoT as well. But I kind of wanted to go over, I don't know if any you've noticed, but I posted a few people's blogs about trends in 2020, specifically DevOps trends that are going to be happening here in 2020. And I kind of wanted to see your take on whether you think these are going to happen, not happen, or really just don't have an opinion on it or can't foresee either way or the other. So, I mean, if you want to get right into it, we can start with the IoT one. The IoT one I have is 5G drives IoT, and kind of just talking about how the increased capabilities of devices is going to continue to drive that IoT trend that we've talked about. And I kind of already answered it here and in the previous podcast, but since we're talking about it now, do you think 5G is going to have a bigger role in IoT than, say, other factors?
I don't know that that's necessarily going to have a bigger role. I mean, obviously it has a huge important role. The adoption rate of technologies like that are going to be hugely dependent upon the reliability of them, and so speed and performance is absolutely going to be of critical importance. But the truth is, reliability is already pretty much there as far as a lot of dependencies and human interaction with technology is concerned, dealing with the existing network performance rather, and GPS is a great example of that. And so I think improved speed is always going to be important, but I don't think that's holding anything back right now. I would be more interested to. I would be more interested, but I'd also be less surprised if things like privacy and data concerns became more important to
IoT.
IoT, yeah.
Okay. Mark you down as a maybe for that one.
Maybe, yeah.
All right, so the next one I got is the reemergence of some standards. And this kind of talks about the degrees of freedom with developers and kind of transferring from developer autonomy and the ability to go back to documentation. So a little bit of we don't care how you do it as long as it gets done. Do you think that's going to become it has been a trend? Do you think it's going to further?
I think there's a bit of back and forth there. Standard operating procedure has always been very important for coders who are used to sort of being given an idea that they have to execute upon without really too much direction. And it's also really important for agencies who are worried about the probability of a client having a legal issue or a security issue or something of that nature. So standard operating procedures will always be very important. But you bring up a good point, which is when you're dealing with a rapid deployment process or a rapid build, you're working on prototyping, or you're given just sort of a proof of concept that you have to build. A lot of the time, you're really just using a lot of plug-and-play solutions to try to get you to where it is that you are going. And the question, I guess, becomes like, what does the reemergence of standardization mean? Does it mean that we're standardizing practices of increased middleware, or does it mean that we're standardizing practices of design patterns? So, like, are we actually starting to try to see how to implement greater structure and framework to developers who do have that sort of theoretical freedom, and try to be like, okay, you can do whatever it is you want as long as you get it done, but follow these rules? Or are we saying like, hey, you got to get done as quickly as possible. Here are the modern standards. You have to follow these framework minimum requirements, and whatever it is that you plug and play, whatever middleware you use,
you just got to keep track of it.
You just have to keep track of it. So that's the question, I guess, is like, what does standardization mean there? Is it just, are we just looking at like security patch measures, saying like it has to be a minimum X requirement? Or are we looking at it and saying like, okay, you have to follow certain design patterns? And, I think it really depends upon the application. And I brought this up before, but like design pattern standardization is really about big O notation to a degree. So you're worried about sort of like your time and space complexity, and that depends upon the sort of application that you're running. Does it have to deal with a ton of data, or is it more important that it's executing it quickly? Is the data sort of breadth or depth oriented? And that sort of is going to drive a lot of what the design patterns are from an algorithmic standpoint. But as far as like sort of like comparing frameworks that are graduating from a more procedural experience to a more sort of OOP or MVC architecture, you saw PHP go through that. You're seeing JavaScript sort of going through an age like that. What does that mean? I don't know. I'm sure that they will all sort of start trying to follow those standard design patterns. So I do think standardization will reemerge in those languages. But you bring up a good question, which is like, why are a lot of these languages becoming more popular? Python, Ruby on Rails had its heyday, or Ruby in general. JavaScript frameworks like Node.js and Angular and React and so forth. They're all, why did they become popular? Before they started really trying to follow those design patterns that a lot of their predecessors had already gone through. It's a curious question. I don't know what the answer to it is, but I think that ultimately will determine, like, that's what you need to look at to determine if standardization is going to reemerge. Because if people are attracted to those languages because they're not standardized, and then they become standardized, they're just going to move to a different language, right?
It's kind of like, what's the hip thing to do right now, right? Is like social media sees this all the time, where it's like Twitter used to be like the cool thing to do, and then all the businesses got on it and everybody kind of dropped off and went somewhere else. Even though Twitter is still popular, it lost that edginess, if you will, kind of thing. Sure,
yeah. I think it's also like just and you bring up you brought up a good word, which is freedom. I think that there are a lot of sort of more procedural type coders out there who like the sort of freedom of like, I don't need to do exactly as all these people are telling me to do. I'm just going to run with it. Because it's easier for me to learn that way. And Corey made a good point earlier. I don't know if he can hear me, but but that is that it's becoming increasingly more tedious to become a JavaScript developer when you're dealing with all of the sort of framework, middleware, and design patterns that didn't used to exist in the JavaScript. I don't want to say use the word syntax, but the JavaScript world in general. And so that's becoming a bit more tedious. And I could see people who are more like, hey, I just want to do this and get it done with and write a script and not have to, follow a certain protocol or whatever, that they might be like, okay, well, now the JavaScript's going this direction, I'm going to look at a different language. But, it might just be that they're also looking at it saying execution performance is so much better. I mean, Node.js executes vastly faster than PHP does. And so you might say to yourself, hey, I'm really just interested in performance, and so that's why I've taken this direction. And I'm now glad that there are those standards and practices and design patterns.
Yeah, I originally picked it for this reason, not sacrificing the standards, but now the standards are coming back, and I'm okay with it. Right?
Yeah.
Fair enough. So next one I got here is the end of plan, build, run, and stage gates. And it's kind of the idea of pausing between build and run while experts run their quality controls and stuff like that. And I kind of had the thought of this as like, is it already gone? Like, is it going to exist in 2020? Is it even existing in 2019?
I guess, I mean, that's the age-old conversation between like waterfall and agile methodologies. And if you're looking at the way that we're dealing with like Rumble as an example, I don't think that's the best example, because we do deploy way more often than anyone else does, including Microsoft, and we're a far smaller team. And so that's kind of like agile to the extreme, where we really need to probably reel that in just a little bit. But I mean, I don't think that it's gone. I do think there are still quality control measures, and there are still, unit testing and stuff and so forth going on. It's just a matter of sort of like trying to figure out how to run those pipelines and to run those workflows as close to parallel as possible. And that's kind of the idea behind a lot of agile methodologies, is like, well, if it's Wednesday and my sprint started on Monday, then QA should be already reviewing whatever it is I did, like, in my previous deployment on last Thursday or Friday in post-launch, and then, reviewing my pre-launch, before the deployment cycle. So there's a little bit of overlap there, and then there's some overlap in terms of like, the developers might be moving on to the next stage by the time that like a deployment engineer is running it. So I do think there still are structured and controlled and disciplined positions within the project lifecycle, but it really depends upon like, how big is your company? Is this internal? Is this client driven? What are your deadlines? What are your deliverables? Can you reach them within this time frame? What's your MVP look like?
So it sounds
I think
like
it depends.
It sounds like it, instead of framing that as like an on-off switch as terms of like waterfall versus agile, it seems it's more of a scale. And our examples are definitely on the more agile side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's a lot easier to collaborate and move a lot faster too. You're going to have a real difficult time when you use I'll finish my sentence first. You're going to have a real difficult time getting anywhere quickly with the waterfall method. You might get what you wanted, the total product of what you really truly wanted in the end, slightly sooner than if you're deploying. But you're going to have a faster to-market strategy if you're coming up with an MVP and deploying that and sort of doing a feature. Right. And I think that's going to get your name out there faster. It's going to gather a lot more attention. And if you're competing against those agile guys as a waterfall company, you're really going to need a sort of ton of funding if you're going to compete down the road. So I think that it really, when you use the terms plan, build, run, I think that the question is, how big is that? Are you planning the whole thing, building the whole thing? Or are you sort of planning and building each feature and function as you go along? The biggest difficulty for people who are not building internal product, who are really sort of contractors and agencies and freelancers and stuff, is going to be how they manage the expectations of the person on the other end. Because they will they'll have heard the word agile, but they don't understand it. They don't know what that means, because from a purchasing standpoint, you're like, I'm putting a lot of money out here and putting a deposit down. Like, I need to see some results. Where's the product, right? And so from an agile standpoint, you're like, here's part of the product. And they're like, whoa, this is missing a lot of the things that we talked about. So sometimes showing them a proof of concept is almost bad, because they think, they're like, wow, well, how is it they didn't do all these important things that I talked about? There's a huge gap between like a technical MVP and like an actual business MVP. What a development resource is looking at. They're like, hey, these are the minimum requirements necessary to put this framework out there and to build the functionality required to like the minimum degree, all essentially building out the dependencies, the core framework and stuff first, and then all the ancillary features. And whereas a business person might be saying like, hey, I know that the basic business model of whatever industry I'm in is to do X, Y, and Z. But like, I don't know, let's use Tesla, for example. Like, you're like, the basics are this car needs to run. Like, there needs to be an engine. It needs to get from point A to point B, and it needs to do it in not a worse manner than another car. But the selling point is not that. The selling point is, obviously electronic, and then, luxury, and then, from a cost standpoint, you have
it's
to
got
be able to
all the
compare.
other features, but those are add-ons.
Right. So, but from, Elon Musk's standpoint, those aren't add-ons. That's the sales. That's the sales point, right? That's the idea. So for his idea of what an MVP is going to be different than what somebody else's idea of, maybe his engineers' ideas of an MVP are.
Well, probably every engineering team's working on a different MVP, right?
Within his, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, like the team that's working on battery life has MVP. The team that's working
okay, right. But each of those individual teams are attributing a feature that may or may not be part of the actual minimum viable product itself.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think you answered it. It's like it's not so much the end of it. It's just where teams and companies are going to lie on that scale. The next one I got is, I think this one's really interesting. More teams will shift mindsets from job done to value realized. Will teams think about the definition of done from being I did my job to the value is realized?
Oh God, I hope. I really hope. That's the one thing that drives me absolutely nuts more than anything else is like and to be completely honest, and this might be fairly controversial, but I don't necessarily believe that, because I'm not going out on a limb to suggest that a lot of developers they're missing some of the
they have tunnel vision.
They have tunnel vision, absolutely, and they might look at things in a lot more of an objective standpoint than somebody who might actually pick up on social cues that they might not. Yeah. That's a personality issue to a certain degree, which is why a lot of these people work with computers to begin with. But that's really what it comes down to, is like, oh, I did the task, and so therefore the task is done. But when the quality,
therefore my work is done,
right? And therefore my work is done. And there's that's like first of all, that's a work ethic issue. But second of all, it's a business intent issue. It's like, are they actually connected to the value that the business is presenting? Do they understand the reasoning behind it?
Why they're doing this task?
Right, and that has a lot to do with how the team lead communicates things, or the product owner communicates things to really help the developer understand the business logic involved, so that they can say like, hey, this is not the right way of going about it. This is the right way of going about it. That said, that's going to be a never-ending battle, I think. I don't know that there's any sort of silver bullet and timeline that's going to just suddenly get people to start giving it shit, about what it is that they're building and how to do it effectively. And so I really hope it does, but that's a cultural thing, to be completely honest. It's really not even like a technical issue. And
there's no technical.
And I have extreme doubts about the interest in a lot of the sort of like up and coming or newly indoctrinated development resources out there, really understanding what the opposite side of being gainfully employed in this looks like, because salaries have been going up and up and up, and people are really just graduating into that position where they're sort of, do I want to say that they're a little bit privileged in that manner, and not really necessarily understanding that, like, you're presenting a value to your company, but you're also presenting a value to your client or product owner. And if your value or your cost outweighs the value that you're presenting, you have no business having a job. Like, you should be fired or laid off, or you basically have no business being there.
Take on more value.
Right. So like, should they know value over sort of like I've done my job and my job is now done?
Yeah.
Yeah, they should. Will they? I have no idea. And
we'll leave it as a hopefully.
And I mean, it really, I guess the question is too is like, a lot of it depends upon the direction that you're providing. Like too is you're not saying to somebody like, I need you to build I need you to make a putter, right?
Oh God, everyone watching, Mike's gonna putt for you.
No.
Oh, okay.
No. If you're like, hey, I need you to make a putter, and you're like, okay, and you just have a stick with a 90-degree angle with another stick coming off of it, you're like, I made a putter, and someone's like, that's not a putter, that's a piece of garbage. There's no value in that.
That's 2 sticks.
The person who built it's like, dude, I'm not a golfer. What the heck do I know? That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't give a shit. It could just mean that they just don't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of it's about communicating where you're like, hey, listen, like the shaft has to be like this and your head's got to be at a certain angle. It's got to be a certain weight. And like, here are the physics behind, striking a ball properly at a certain speed and so forth. And, where you want to hit it on the head and all that. That's all stuff that you need to be able to communicate. So the greater in detail the specifications, the more likely it is going to move from sort of like a job done to a value realized situation. But that's kind of outside of the control of the developer. That's really about specifications.
It's more of like a team orientation and a team lead kind of thing, like you brought up.
Right, and so I guess the ultimate question, the final question before we move on to the next one, because I'm taking up a lot of time here, is like, what has been presented to the industry to make specifications clearer and easier to write and assemble? I'm not sure that there really has been much.
Interesting.
There are different documentation formats out there for different languages, but I'm not so sure that there's necessarily like a way of like
a silver bullet, as you put it.
Right. I mean, there are definitely tools out there. Like I know, I'm trying to think of some offhand where you can assemble different data schemas like Visio or Draw.io.
But even still, like that's not getting at what you're really talking about. That's not the level of detail of designing a putter that you're talking about. Visio.
No, I mean you're like that's like gosh, I'm trying to remember one of them. That's you're actually kind of, if you look at it like an architect, you're talking about an architect.
Yeah,
you're talking about somebody who's like actually spending the time to create building specs to the greatest degree, and that's why. And from a family of contractors. I know this firsthand. That's why you don't necessarily need to when you're hiring people in the building world, you're hiring people who can do a certain task a certain way from that skill set. They're not necessarily hired to try to engineer the solution and architect it on their own. They've done this over and over and over.
They have standards.
They know standards and procedures.
Yeah. That's interesting. I wonder how that's going to fit back into I think the second one we talked about with the reemergence of standards based off, not focusing on how, but just getting it done.
Yeah.
I think that those might play into each other. But so the next one, which is very close to our hearts, tool fatigue will worsen before it gets better. In 2020, your take?
Oh, absolutely.
So,
is it going to get better?
I think we hopefully have a solution for that. Obviously,
I think so. But it's like I was telling Corey before. When I started in industry, there really weren't too many tools out there. I think NetBeans was the popular IDE, and Facebook was being developed at Harvard, and there really weren't too many. Some people were sort of getting started with Dreamweaver, which I hate to even mention that name, but there were mostly, for the most part, you were dealing with a limited set of frameworks and content management systems. You were dealing with a limited set of languages that had really matured, and now you're dealing with a ton of them. And there's all sorts of like cross-language integrations where, like ES6. We were just working on this project the other day where, we had JavaScript and PHP code in the same like for each loop. Like for ES6, it was just like an insane thing to look at. And you're dealing with like a ton of all these like vendor files, node modules, all sorts of like different middleware dependencies, and that stuff wasn't really as much of a thing. I mean, you had ASPX .NET as a .NET as a language had a number of different DLLs that you'd have to install, and this, that, and the other thing, different libraries, and because that was a pretty mature language and framework. But your back then, but a lot of the other languages in the open source marketplace really weren't like that, and now they very much are. And so there's a lot of middleware that was being, and this gets back to what I was trying to say, which is that was being indoctrinated, or the new developers were being indoctrinated into 6, 7, 8 years ago. And so those kids really started off with like Ruby on Rails and like a lot of these what my friend Raz used to refer to as magic. A lot of these you're just installing other people's code, libraries essentially, and you're dealing with tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of middleware, and all the tools involved in maintaining all of that middleware spun up a whole thing called DevOps just to help maintain all that stuff. So tool fatigue absolutely is an issue, and it really occurred, I think, because like I was getting back to before, when the people who before me, and I guess I got caught somewhere in the middle, were very much sort of like writing code from scratch, soup to nuts, and those people are all retiring, and the people who were coming in were coming into
we have a tool for everything.
We've got a tool for everything.
It's all written,
and there's
already.
all this middleware for you. You just plug and play this, that, and the other thing, and here's some code snippets you can just copy and paste here and there, all these libraries for you. And so they just kind of were like, instead of saying like, oh, I have to learn how this language works, they're just like, okay, I have to learn how to manage these tools, and then that'll help me get the actual coding done. So I think that's why it got worse. I'm hoping that we can help solve that. But I mean, dude, look at all of the Silicon Valley tech, there's a new tool for everything. Like, oh, we do this slightly different than somebody else, and you need us to work with this person and that, this framework and that framework, and billion ways of analyzing different analytics and stuff like that. And it's just tool fatigue is outrageous, and it's honestly, it's gotten to a point where it's not even efficient anymore. You're kind of losing money maintaining all those tools.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think we have a solution for it. We're definitely getting there, to the point of putting everything under one umbrella is kind of how
if you can find a way to leverage them without having to maintain them.
Yeah,
that's the goal.
Yeah, because you lose all of that efficiency the moment you have to start working on the tool itself.
Right, and what's funny is like look at things like LastPass and single sign-on with Facebook and Google and stuff like that as just a really simple, small solution to kind of addressing one issue with tool fatigue, which is like, imagine having to maintain logins for every single one of these tools that you're doing, and you're having to do it in like, your password manager, password vault, whatever. If you could integrate them, so and I guess Atlassian's a good example with all their products, like Jira and Bitbucket and all that sort of stuff integrated with one another. If you can just navigate here and there without having to constantly deal with new permissions and roles and logins, then you'd be saving a great deal of time. And so that's just one way that it's not the best example, but it's an example of ways that people are trying to slowly but surely approach that.
Yeah. No, I think I got one more here that kind of goes with it. The increase in low-code DevOps, and it kind of talks about the need for speed to create DevOps builds. We expect DevOps platforms to integrate low-code tools that help define pipelines through easier-to-use point-and-click UI. So kind of what we are working on. So do you think that there will be an increase in that extremely... what's the opposite of robust? Simple code systems and tools for people to use. Do you think we'll see an increase in those?
That's a great question. I mean, we're going to be deploying one, so I guess we'll be increasing by at least one.
Yeah, at least one. But so
I hope for our sake that there's not a ton of competition in that area, but I think there needs to be. I haven't really seen any evidence of any new products coming out that are doing that. I guess, which is part of the reason why we're doing this to begin with. But so to answer the question, I have not been provided with any objective reason to believe that is the case, that it will become sort of less codey. But it certainly needs to go that way, because from a management standpoint, like, what are you going to do? Start teaching upper management how to code so that they can do code reviews for all of the people that they're managing in that hierarchy?
Yeah, and then
not a chance.
If you start giving everyone the freedom to use whatever tool that they find, all of a sudden everyone that's reviewing this code is going to have to know all of these different parts.
So, like, standard operating procedures are gone in that case.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to, if you're going to, it's really a matter of governance, right? If you're going to manage the standards of your company, if you're going to manage the quality of the work that you're outputting, and if you're going to be able to have control over the timelines of your business, those three things are critical to any business in any industry. Absolutely critical. And if you're telling me that in order to verify quality, you have to do a code review. In order to verify operating procedures are being followed, you have to know about all the technology involved. And that in order to reach your deadlines, you actually need to be able to deploy the code using, syntax that or command line that someone in upper management might not actually know how to do. Then you're basically taking all the tools of success away from your upper management.
Yeah.
So it has to happen.
That's interesting. So I have a grand total of the 6 or so that we went over. I lost count. You hopefully agree with 3 of them and disagree with 2 of them, and 1 you have no opinion. So pretty well across the board there.
Of the ones that I didn't answer, do you want to do like a lightning round?
Oh, yeah, sure. You want to go through them real quick?
You might as well.
DevOps will become more measurable with metrics, and metrics will become better defined.
I hope so.
I hope so. See again.
Yeah. I'm not sure that it will necessarily. I mean, metrics are constantly. The idea of metrics right now is like, and a lot of the tools that are out there trying to push them is like, how can we create metrics that people will think that they need so that we can help push our product?
Yeah.
And it's just analysis paralysis, and it's big data to the extreme, and that's that sort of like that whole idea that there's too much data to be analyzed.
Yeah, you lose all of the insights that you gain from it by spending so much time processing it.
Right.
Interesting. All right, DevOps teams will earn more and experience. DevOps teams will earn more and experience increased job satisfaction. More or less talking about how DevOps teams are going to be rid of the more mundane tasks with AI and machine learning and stuff like that.
Then why would you have a DevOps team?
Exactly my point as well.
Yeah.
I kind of had the same thought.
Yeah. I mean, if you think that your job's going to get easier and you're going to earn more money, you really don't know how the economy works at all.
We kind of talked about this one already. This one, we kind of been talking about this one the whole time. A new generation of IT takes over. You kind of brought it in how like the new generation of IT professionals are kind of used to this plug and play, grab a solution off the internet. The code's already been written. You don't have to worry about it. As long as you can maintain it, you'll be good to go. And the more or less the point this person was trying to make in the blog was like the people that had to write all of their own solutions are retiring, and no one's going to.
Same point I made earlier.
Yeah, exactly. So agree with that one completely. Artificial intelligence adoption will rise. Again, same thing, just like using AI to go through all of that data mining that we've talked about and find the best solutions and insights to businesses and stuff like that. Obviously, it's kind of a no-brainer that's always going to rise. So, I mean, out of the 11 that we had, or 10 that we had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 we agree with, didn't agree with 3 of them, and 1 of them we were kind of like, we don't really know. It kind of depended on, that was the standardization one. It kind of depends on the team itself. But no, I think it was interesting. a lot of people have been talking about a lot of different things and seeing where things are going to go. And reading through it, I've kind of developed an opinion on some of while reading through these, I kind of developed an opinion on some of them based off our experiences and what we're working on and things. So I wanted to get your opinion on it. I'll be posting all of the blogs that I got these from on our blog post of this podcast, as well as in the YouTube description if anyone's curious. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out at support@arcanestrategies.com. I'm glad to hear from you. Anything you want to bring up or anything like that. If you like the podcast, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or just subscribe to our mailer at arcaneradio.com. And here's to a whole nother year of podcasting and talking about technologies and arcane strategies and everything we do.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for it. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.